My dad was a high-stakes con man, and he was a criminal. I explicitly left India to get away from that.
I'm sure you lived through uncertainty. You had your identity shift, as every human being has.
I had a mother I had to take care of in India, financially, and failure was not an option. One of my first jobs was waiting on tables, and it was my mother and me, and we had to make sure that we actually survived.
I experience a lot with CEOs and people that have such a level of responsibility. They create their own success strategy out of necessity.
There was a lot of insecurity. There was a lot of uncertainty. Am I smart enough to be able to do it?
His father was a criminal. His mother was all he had. He left India with nothing, waited tables to survive, couldn't even type. Today, he's the president and chief product officer of Cisco, leading over 40,000 engineers and refounding one of the most iconic companies in technology. Jeetu Patel's story is one of the most raw and honest conversations I've ever had on this show. So if you want to understand what it really takes to go from nothing to the top of a $50 billion company and what it cost you personally along the way, this is the episode.
So you have to feel the pride and joy before you can actually convey it. And there's nothing stopping me from doing that. People might say I'm perfect, but...
Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of the World Class Leader Show. Today, very excited, really very, very excited to have with us Jeetu Patel. Jeetu is the Cisco president and chief product officer. So Jeetu has an incredible experience, so I'm not going to read all of that. You're going to find in the show notes, but I think it's important to say that Jeetu, besides that all that he has right now and the previous incredible experience that he had in technology space, is also a board member of JLL and also an Equinix. So pretty much involved not only in his own organization, but also having an important advisory role in some of other very large organizations. So, and you're calling from California. So Jeetu, thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Andrea. And just so you know, I'm a former board member of Equinix. I had to roll off of that because my workload was too heavy, and so I'm only on JLL, and then I work at Cisco.
All right, great.
Yeah.
So that is a good information. So Jeetu, so I would like to start with you. You have in my opinion, a very interesting story. You come from India and then you move to the US. You're not the first one and you're not going to be the last one. Yeah. But it's not necessarily as common. You move up the rank. You had a really incredible career. And I know that you had an ambition. I'm sure, you lived through uncertainty. You had your identity shift or crisis, as every human being has. Tell me more, if we rewind before the titles that you have and the Cisco story, what's really the story and most people don't know about how you got there?
It's a great question. And every once in a while, you kind of go back memory lane and say, what was the psychology like when you were first getting started? And I think for me, just like everyone else, there was a lot of insecurity. There was a lot of uncertainty. There was a lot around, am I smart enough to be able to do it? Kind of mentality. But the one thing that helped me was I had a mother I had to take care of in India, financially, and failure was not an option. And so the way that the whole thing kind of transpired is like all of those things around insecurity and imposter syndrome and all might have been there, but I had to figure out a way to just make sure that we succeeded because it was my mother and me, and we had to make sure that we actually survived. And so that became a tremendous driving force of focus, which was, there was a singular focus. I just had to make sure that we made enough money to earn a good living and survive. And whatever I needed to do, as long as it was in the bounds of ethics and integrity. And I can tell you a little bit about why that was so important, is because my dad was a high stakes con man and he was a criminal. And so,
oh, wow.
I didn't want to actually live that life. And so I'm like, I explicitly left India to get away from that. And so I'm like, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually do it the hard way. But I want to make sure that we actually, my mother and I can have a good life. And that was the motivating factor that drove a lot. But, like anyone else who's coming in, like you're still always questioning whether or not you're good enough, whether or not you can make something happen. I think what ends up happening with social media especially is everyone's image looks picture perfect. And the reality
Yeah.
is all of us go through a bunch of struggles, and all of us have ups and downs and emotional, kind of anxieties that happen from time to time. And the more we share those, the more I think it's better for society to understand that there's no one living a perfect life. Everyone's got struggles, and everyone's got levels of imperfection that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
You know what? First of all, thank you so much already. Even in the first few minutes, to be so much, open, transparent, and vulnerable about your past, which to me is always a great sign of leaders. So that's, I think, to me, set quite well the scene for the conversation we'll be having. It's also interesting to notice, Jeetu, and there have been some researches. I mean, we had on the show, I don't know whether you are familiar with Adam Bryant. Adam has been the previous, I don't remember whether it was the CEO, but he worked for, New York Times, and he also wrote a lot of books in terms of for the CEOs. And his research interviewed so many CEOs. He clearly came up with something like a pattern. And one of the patterns is some of the most successful CEOs, they actually went through a very challenging time, earlier in their career. Primarily, they create their own success strategy out of necessity, out of concern, challenges, all the things that come into, to our life as, yours. So to me, it doesn't surprise, the ability for you to create your own career on the back of what happened when you were in India. So to me, that connects the dots in what I heard before. Look, and how do you think that changed your approach to leadership? I mean, what you said in terms of your story with your mom, your dad, the fact of, the imposter syndrome. Now you're leading an organization. We'll come back to this in a moment. But how all of this story has shaped your own leadership, the way how you're showing up right now?
There were a few seminal moments that created unlocks for me. And one of them was I used to stutter as a kid. And one of my first jobs was waiting on tables. And you quickly realize that if you stutter and don't entertain a group of people when they come in to have dinner, you're not going to make a good tip. And it was remarkable where during my stint where I waited on tables, my stuttering automatically went away. I was very introverted. I was very shy. I was very kind of not confident. But waiting on tables unlocked that for me. So that was one. The second big one was I was really bad at typing because we never learned how to type in India, And then I came over here and everyone was like just such a fluent typist. Like they would type so fast. And I had a job, one of my first jobs that I was doing here was data entry. And, the person I was doing this for, it was my uncle. And he's like, he was telling me like, hey, your typing speed is not something I can brag about to people. Like, so I'm having a hard time justifying paying you. And so one weekend, they were all going to go out to New Year's Eve celebration or something for holiday. And I stayed home. And for 72 hours, Andrea, I just typed. And I started the evening of the first night at 20 words a minute. And I ended by the third day at about 90 words a minute. And wow. I just reprogrammed. And that was a big unlock because what that told me was whatever I choose to do and whatever I choose to learn, I can learn. It's just a matter of now just deciding what you want to learn. And so that learn it all mentality became an unlock for me saying, oh, so I can just now choose to learn whatever I want to learn and I'll be able to learn it. And there's nothing stopping me from doing that. Which, by the way, up until today has been a tremendous tailwind for me because while people might say I don't have experience, I tend to not get too bothered about not having experience. I just tend to figure out a way to gain the experience by learning it at an accelerated pace. And I think AI helps. And then the third one was this notion of if you build, like, let your work speak for yourself. Like what I found was people focus a lot on networking. I'm going to go meet people, get to know people. And I always tell people, one of the biggest things I learned was If you know all the big people, but if you don't have your work that stands for something, all of the great people will not be able to help you. And if you do great work that stands by itself and is seen as a measure of excellence, people will seek you out, even if they don't know you. And so in my mind, the obsessive focus on doing great work and having pride in the craftsmanship of what you deliver, whatever that is, I think is more important than the networking activity that people spend a lot of time on. Now, by the way, talk to other people so that you can learn from them. But talking to other people so you know them so that at some point in time they can help you out, I find is not a good use of time. Those were kind of three unlocks that I had early on in my career that stayed with me and helped me quite a bit, I think.
And did, your intention, your commitment to create something always as a great product in whatever you do, right? That's the way how you describe it. Did that for any reason lead to perfectionism and also in somehow, trying to create your own witness strategy out of your imposter syndrome that you had, you were when you had before when you were younger, or you have been able to control that to the extent that when it's great enough and good enough, even if you're looking always for, the greatest possible value of the work that you do?
I do have a little bit of a character flaw in that I tend to derive a lot of intrinsic pleasure in extremely good design, and I admire design quite a bit, and so design in my mind is that aspect of trying to get something to be as perfect as possible. And so that is an obsession that I have. I would say that in some cases that's a personality flaw, because there's a point of diminishing return sometimes, but like really caring about the craftsmanship for me has always been something that is important, because it is the ultimate way to show respect to your customer when you sweat the details.
Right.
And especially sweating the details on things that are not completely obvious to the naked eye, but then when you actually dig down a couple levels deeper, people can tell, oh, wow, they've really sweat the details on a few levels below what's obvious to at the surface level. And that I've always used I'm not even sure if it's a guiding principle. That's just who I am. And so, and my team will sometimes get mad at me going, okay, now you're obsessing about things that might not really matter. Let's just move on because we have other things to get done. And I'm like, no, but let's just take this one last crank at it, because it's not quite right. And so I do feel like that's an area that I tend to focus on quite a bit. And it's served me well, because what it does do is it gives you a lot of pride and joy in the work product that you create. And a lot of the stuff, Andrea, is if you don't feel the pride and joy, you will never be able to communicate that to someone else in a fake way. So you have to feel it before you can actually convey it. And you have to figure out for yourself what makes you feel the pride and joy. And you have to make sure that you obsess on that piece of it.
Yeah, makes sense. That definitely makes sense. So you moved from being founder in a startup world into becoming a leader in a big tech company.
Yeah.
How was for you? Because it's not necessarily a simple, kind of a move for people that are used to work in a very, entrepreneurial environment.
Yeah, it was, I used to run a market research firm with another partner of mine in Chicago. And the problem that I had was, I would read all these news bits and magazine articles and browse the internet and see all the other companies and the decisions they're making having a ripple effect on the rest of the world and how people live.
Yes.
And I never felt like we were doing that in my small little market research firm. Like the impact was not large scale. And so I always had that itch saying, I want to understand scale. And so I did the reverse thing, which is I started in a startup and then I went to a large company. But I went to a large company because I wanted to understand scale. But here's what that large company, here's why that sequence really worked for me. I'm not sure it works for everyone, but it worked for me. The reason it worked for me is when you're in a small company, you think like an owner because you are an owner. I mean, you're not really that worried about functional boundaries and any of that stuff. You think like an owner. You're like, what do we need to do to get the business successful? That's all you're thinking about.
Yes.
You know this in the podcast business that you're running right now, right? And the business that you're running right now. When you go to a large company, oftentimes, and the people that have been at large companies for a while, oftentimes think like functional leaders. This is my swim lane. This is what I'm going to do, and that's great. That's not bad thinking that way. I've found that having a holistic perspective of the business and thinking like an owner provides a disproportionate advantage to you in your career. And so for me, the way I think about me at Cisco is I think of me at Cisco as a late stage co-founder of Cisco. I think of this as my company. I think of this as something that these are my people, and I'm going to make sure that I actually go out and drive success for my people. And if there's someone that is coming at us, we will make sure that we actually strategically go out and figure out a way to win. But I think that really helps in orienting the operating model that you're going to use. And I'm just not motivated by saying, I'm going to stay in my swim lane and I'm going to do my thing, and I'm not going to let anyone else come into my swim lane. I am completely comfortable having anyone come into my function and tell me what I'm doing wrong. And I actually feel like that means that they care, that they're taking the time to come to me to tell me that this is how you can improve. And I feel completely comfortable in going someplace else and saying, hey, this is what we need to do because it's right for the business. Now, by the way, it doesn't always work, because what ends up happening is if you actually have someone who's thinking like an owner and you have someone who's thinking like a functional leader, sometimes it can be a mismatch. But in general, when you give people enough context to say, the only reason I'm doing this is because I want to make sure that you and I are successful together, then most people understand why you're doing it. And so that context is pretty important to set. But I've always found that starting small and going big really helped me in thinking about how a business is run, and then just understanding the scale motions of a larger business. But how a business is run is how a business is run. Like, I know how to read the financials. I know how to read an income statement and a balance sheet from the time that I was 22. And that really helped when I came to a large company. And then we had a public company, and you had tens of billions of dollars in revenue. The fundamentals don't really change. It's like the business is still run in the same way. People still want to make sure that there's shareholder return, and employees need to make sure that they feel like they're contributing. And, customers need to feel like you're giving them value in products that you build. And those things don't really fundamentally change. So I found it to be a pretty lucky thing in my career that I started small and went big. A lot of people start big, and the benefit of starting big is you understand the way that the systems work. You get much more of a systems thinking view, and then you can go small. I think there's benefits to both. And so that's what that's the way my life turned out. But it's been a fun journey.
I'm sure it is. And even myself, I think I moved from the big to the small, and I can definitely see, pros and cons in that journey. So I like the way how you describe it. And by the way, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're leading, is it right, more than 40,000, between engineers and product leaders. So the scale, if that is right, it's incredibly large in terms of how many people, of course, you're not leading them directly, but that's your organization. So something that, I experience a lot with CEOs and people that have such a level of responsibility is, despite how many people they have around, they still feel lonely, in their own leadership role for a number of reasons. So they cannot share maybe fully what, things with their teams. They need to take big decisions on their own. There is a lot of pressure and expectation on them. How do you feel, living this paradox between leading, such a large community, but at the same time being on your own, making some of the big decisions? Even if you, by the way, building, actually not even building on what you said in terms of you're taking ownership, meaning you want to feel like you can do it, you make things happen. So it's up to you, really, in many decisions that you take.
Yeah, the way I think about this, and there is a very real thing around it being lonely at the top. And it's lonely even sometimes on the way to the top. Like one of my great friends in the company is this lady named Fran Katsoudas, who's our chief people, purpose, and policy officer. And she and I talk about this sometimes. It's actually not only is it lonely at the top, sometimes it's also lonely on the way to the top. However, if you think about this as business is a team sport, and typically, like, yes, you're going to have some information asymmetry between what the top of a publicly held company might have versus what the frontline worker is shared with. But the less asymmetry you can create, the better a chance you have of getting people engaged and helping you solve the problem rather than being part of the problem. Right. And so the way that I think about this is, yes, there are certain things which you have to keep to yourself that you can't share with anyone, and that can sometimes be hard. And so what you have to do is surround yourself with mentors and people who can give you, without you sharing the details, can tell you when you are doing things right and tell you when you're actually not doing things right. And having that input and feedback mechanism, because all of us are not the same person every single minute of every day. The external environment actually changes our behavior, changes our mood, changes the way in which we function, changes the way in which we operate. What you have to have is you have to create a strong set of value systems structurally, and then make sure that you've surrounded yourself with people that are not just giving you flattery, which, by the way, is a big problem as you get, successful in large roles, is most people, for no other malicious reason besides they don't want to be the one that actually offends someone, because that might actually hurt them and they don't know if it's going to hurt them. They will just try to be very polite and kind to you at all times, even if they don't believe it. And so you need to find a group of people that are going to be brutally honest. And if you can do that, that really helps. If you look at my head of operations, she's a person that'll actually be brutally honest with me when I'm not doing well, saying, this is not something that is your best work. And I'm going to let you know that these are the things you have to change. My chief of staff is the same way. Sure. You look at, the partnership that I have with our CEO, Chuck. He does a great job at coaching me in things that I could be doing better. My peer group that I have, I always look to them to say, what could I be doing better, and kind of get the input from them. So I do feel like while it might be lonely, you can make it far less lonely by actually getting people around you to be part of your journey to the degree that it's possible. And then there's certain things that you can't share with them.
Absolutely. I agree with you, Jeetu. And I think that's also my personal experience. So I felt extremely lonely when I was a CEO myself. And one thing that unfortunately happens until you build, that network of, or, a peer group of people, that can give you the honest feedback, you can really talk openly and all of that. The risk is then you're going to either keep everything for yourself, which has, as we know, a huge implication on your health, on your life.
That's right.
Right. Or unfortunately, to download everything to your partner. And that's equally is not a good thing. And I was really talking to the CEO a couple of weeks ago, and very privately, that's exactly what she said. She said, look, I don't have anybody to talk to in a moment, very challenging moment for me, leading an organization during change. And, and she said something like, I need to really thank my husband, because, he is there listening to me. He has no idea what I'm dealing with. And even if I do, I can feel better because I'm doing, but he doesn't understand. I need somebody that really understands what I'm going through. So I think, a very long story to say, what you're saying, I think is critical. We're building in my work, we're building a new CEO hub. And that's exactly for that reason, building a peer of CEOs Now, they're not necessarily in the same ecosystem because they don't live in one single company, but always having somebody that can see things from a different perspective, unbiased and more objective and subjective, could be also equally useful.
Andrea, one story I'll tell you recently. So my daughter was turning 15 a few days ago. She was the last night of her being 14. I was going to be missing her birthday because I had to go to Davos. And so her and I were sitting there for like 3 hours the night before talking about stuff. And she said, Dad, I just want to let you know that one of the things that I'm really happy about is I have very strong conviction on a few things. I was telling her about something on make sure that you don't get influenced by some people if they're trying to push you that hard. So her response to that was, I have such a strong level of conviction on things that I believe are right. And then she flipped it on me and she's like, do you have 5 things that you believe in that if the entire world disagreed with you and told you you were wrong, you would still believe that that's the case? Right.
Wow, smart question.
It's very, very intelligent. And so I started rattling off 1 or 2 things. She's like, well, I have a very strong value system on these things. So you don't have to worry about me with me on this one, because I don't look to other people to validate me for me to feel like I've done the right thing. I know what the right thing is. And if that doesn't work for them, then it's their issue, not mine. And I'm like, my job is done. Like, this girl has gotten a pretty strong set of core values. I hope it stays that way, because you can get influenced at that age with anyone. But I do feel like that's a very central piece, is you have to have enough of a foundation of values that you know the right from wrong, even if people around you sometimes will tell you that that's not the case. And then you have to surround yourself with people that share your values, but not necessarily your skills. It's okay for them to have different competencies, but they have to share your core values. And if you do that, then you've actually done well. Oftentimes what ends up happening is people will try to look for people with the same competencies, but they don't pay attention to the shared values. And that's when you start seeing things go sideways.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think you have to really be self-centered in your own values, which the way I call it, even in my book, I call it the identity. Make sure, you're very clear in what is your own identity as a leader. So then you can, whatever message and action you take is always consistent with identity. Yeah. Now, if we, shift to your role, Jeetu, in the organization, this is one of the most probably, I suppose, very pivotal moment for Cisco. You mentioned before about Chuck Robbins, the CEO, and you have been asked to become a change agent in Cisco. And you work for a very legacy company. Yes, still working in technology, in the country, in the place of technology and innovation. Still, Cisco is a legacy business. And you are really rethinking Cisco for the future, meaning in your own words, that really got my attention. I think you're saying you are refounding Cisco. So what does it mean for you right now, doing this in organization? What do you see? What's the upside? Why that matters? And what risk do you see in a large organization like Cisco?
So I think the way that I look at this is, this notion that we have in technology specifically is we tend to bucket companies into, you're an old legacy company, you're a modern startup, right? Yeah. And that's the typical kind of juxtaposition we do. And the reality for me, at least in my mind, is something far more simple. And that is that innovation, which is basically what everything is kind of anchored to, which is, can you innovate fast or can you not innovate fast, is the difference when you really kind of bring it down. Innovation is a choice. It is not something that is a God-given right for companies that are small, and it is not a right that cannot be given to companies that are large. And in fact, there's different levels of complexity that comes with size and scale, but the reality is you can operate like a startup. It's just, if you're large, you can aspire to operate like the world's largest startup. And that's kind of like what we want to do is let's make sure that we move really fast. We are, very dynamic and responsive to the market without being reactionary, and exercise the choice of saying we're going to build amazing technology that changes people's lives at scale. So we're going to move at speed with scale. And so I don't really think, and so then the only thing that you have to do is you have to change the cultural norms, which if you think about culture, what is culture? Culture is basically an agreed upon set of behaviors that people use within an organization to get work done, right?
Yes.
And if you can change those cultural norms to be more around agility and constant learning and constant assessment of what you didn't do well and how can you get better, that is not a exclusive right of startups. That is something that any company can choose to do. And so what we did about 4 or 5 years ago is we just chose to do that. And we said, we're going to start innovating. We're going to make sure that we actually, work in a very agile way across different teams, cross-functionally. We're going to build a platform. We're going to have an open ecosystem. We're going to build products people love. We're going to talk about this in normal human language to people outside in the world, rather than talking in business jargon. And we're just going to get rid of the things that create a calcification and plaque within an organization because you've just not been brushing your teeth for a long time, and then the plaque starts to build up. And so don't do that, and make sure that you're flossing and brushing regularly. And the equivalent of flossing and brushing regularly in a company is making sure that when these kind of disconnects start to happen between teams, you address them. You actually don't shy away from conflict. You think of conflict as a necessary condition of business. You have the debates. You focus on the best idea winning. You, to some degree, disrespect hierarchy, and you prioritize ideas over hierarchy. All of those things really matter in changing the cultural norms. And then you change your reward system to be based on first principles approaches. So if, for example, in product, if you don't build something that people use, what is exactly the point of building it? So when people go and start talking about how they shipped something, but they had crappy adoption, what I tell people is, if you ship something that didn't get adopted, it is just as bad as you not shipping something. Arguably, it's actually worse, because now you're carrying the cost of shipping something that's garbage that no one's using.
Yeah.
So I think that shift is what we've been able to successfully conduct over the course of the past few years. And I'm super proud that, the resistance was far less than I thought it would be. And the reason for that is most people that are coming in to work every day, especially the front lines, they typically want to come into work to do a good job. Most people don't come in to say, today I'm going to beat the system. Yes. What ends up happening is poor leadership and poor communication and lack of clarity creates apathy, where these people just give up at some point. I think, hey, you know what? I don't think I'm going to be able to beat the system. So might as well at that point in time, I might as well just go out and take advantage of it. And we need to make sure that when that happens, we make it safe for people to say, let's call an audible, And I feel like that foundational value system of speaking truth to power rather than coming up with your own metrics, that you create your own version of your truth that you then start believing in, which is the wrong thing to believe in, I feel is a cultural norm that has to change in large companies. That if you do that, where people don't try to go out and create a dress rehearsal. Like when I have a dashboard where everything is green, but the business is growing at below inflation rate, there's something wrong. Everything should not be green, because there's one or two things that are happening. Either your ambition isn't high enough, or you're not being truthful about the situation.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, why is everything green and you're not growing the business? Like something's disconnected,
So look, that's great, really, what you're sharing. And I love the conviction, and I think you're touching the right thing. Look, culture is based on a human system. And as I always say, no matter how good is your product, your process, your structure, your non-human system, but if the human system then is not really what you're looking for, whatever you're trying to do as a transformation, innovation, etc., is not going to really stick, because at the end of the day, we deal with humans. That's what we do. Maybe in the near future, we're going to only probably deal with AI agents, but that's a different world. At the moment, we're still dealing with humans. So I think you are onto really the right thing, meaning is people. And do you feel like the current environment, I'm sure, is a function of leadership, the success that you experienced in changing that, but you feel like the environment or where Cisco is based, the fact that Cisco is, even if it's a large and legacy company, is still a technology company, do you feel it's easy to make those sort of changes to become much more entrepreneurial as an organization because it's also function environment? Because, there are so many other companies, they are as big as Cisco, but maybe they don't live necessarily in an environment that might be maybe supporting or facilitating or be a catalyst for that change. So as a result of that, they're still really trying to find a way to become much more entrepreneurial. But then the reality, they're just building bureaucracy, or they are, slowing down decision, all of that. So I don't know whether you have a view on that.
Yeah, I think the ability to change or not to change actually has a lot to do with whether you have air cover from the top.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so when I first joined Cisco, I had a lot of air cover from Chuck, and that's actually sustained. And so whenever there's hurdles that come your way, you're able to overcome the hurdles because you've got air cover, because you've got conviction for what needs to happen.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a pretty important dynamic. Is every CEO has to think about what are the projects which are going to be culturally hard that create friction in the organization, and what is that CEO or leader going to do to provide air cover to the people that you've put in charge to create that friction? Because you cannot ask someone to say, go do this, and then not give them the air cover. Like, then it doesn't work. Then they're not able to do it, And so, and that is not because they're not smart or they're not well-intentioned. It's just you have not given them agency. And if you don't give them agency, it's very hard for them to go out and make things happen without agency. So I think like giving that level of air cover, that level of agency is super important. That's number one. Number two is, as we get into this world of AI, everything changes one more time. And it changes very dramatically, where we aren't just talking about a productivity tool that gets us better. We are talking about augmenting digital coworkers as teammates that are added to the team, who are now going to do things that we don't have time to do or we don't like to do, number one. Number two, these agents will do things that we are not as good as doing it as agents. So it'll make more sense for the agents to do that work.
Yeah.
And number three, the agents will do work that we just simply can't do because they're just more capable at doing those things. But what that'll allow us to do then is ideally shift our focus to doing things we can do way better than agents. And then the combination of those two things can actually create magic. And I feel like that mental model shift has not happened yet with every organization, every enterprise yet. I think there's still kind of, the way that people go at this is they're very apprehensive of losing their job. And I always tell people, don't worry about AI taking your job, but definitely worry about someone using AI better than you taking your job. And 1000% worry about, if you don't use AI, you will 100% lose your job because you won't be relevant for the next wave. And that, I think, is a pretty important dynamic to keep in mind as you go through it, and it's hard to, it's scary. It's like change is very scary. But there was someone that told me one time, like, if you think change is scary, just wait until you come across irrelevance. It's far more scarier, than change. And so you might as well kind of learn to, the question is not how do we make sure that the environment gets certain so that we can get more predictable in the way we operate. The question is to learn how to operate in the unpredictability and not get thrown off and be responsive in markets. And I feel like that's a learned skill for the next era. And those companies that don't master that probably won't do as well, you know.
Yeah, it's a great perspective. And I think it's, as you say, I think the conversation has also shifted in terms of the relationship that people / employees have with AI. It started with, oh God, am I losing the job because AI is coming? Now it's more about, am I losing the job or an opportunity because AI is doing things better because I don't get it, or I don't understand it, or I don't know how to use AI in the system. I think it's such a great different context that you just shared. I think would be interesting for those people that are listening in terms of how can they recreate a new relationship themselves with AI, looking at what's about to happen in the future that I think we're just scratching the surface.
But here's the thing, for example, like if you look at the past 3 years, we've been talking about how AI is going to take every job, right?
Yeah.
And if you look right now, there is actually more scarcity around jobs where people understand AI than ever before. So
100%.
Rather than you avoiding that, if you had 3 years ago just said, I'm going to embrace it, your job would be more in demand today than if you had avoided AI 3 years ago.
Big time.
And that's a very simple thing. Like, just look at the data in the past 3 years. Like, you will make sure that you will be more marketable, more relevant, it'll be more lucrative for you if you understand this than if you don't understand it. So don't try to avoid it, because that fear of something to the point that you avoid something, I don't think it was going to serve you well.
Yeah, totally aligned with you. I have a last question for you, Jeetu. I mean, is flying in, such a great conversation. So it's kind of a circling back from where we started. You started with saying, look, I started with, in a very challenging situation. Then I moved. Then I came to the US. I became a founder. I work in startup. Then I moved to corporate. Then I moved up the rank. And now I'm a change agent for a massive transformation for organization. What's the implication for you as a person, not only as a leader? Meaning in terms of how you're dealing with with the pressure, the expectation that come with your role, with your responsibility. You're managing more than 40,000 people, but also you need to lead, and be the change agent for the organization. What's your core mechanism? What you do to stay grounded? You said focus is important for you, but is this something that you can share with? Because a lot of people that are listening right now, they say, oh God, how can I deal with all of that? In work, in business, person, but also mentally, physically for my own.
See, I think in life, and I'll use one of Ben Horowitz's statements that he had in the book Hard Thing About Hard Things. It's a very good
great book, by the way. Yeah.
He talks about this whole notion of when you're in a leadership position, you have to learn how to manage your psychology. Now, I will be the first to tell you that it is impossible for anyone to perfect managing your psychology. There are days that I have that are good days where I feel like $1 million and I feel like I'm going to conquer the world. And then there are days that I have where I feel like, you know what, this was a day that felt like a setback. Everyone has those days. The reality is what do you do on the days when you actually feel like you had a setback? And who do you turn to? And have you created an ecosystem around you of people that know when to pull you up when you're down, and that know when to keep you on the ground when you're flying too high? And do it because they care about you and your well-being, not your ego, right? And I think that's a very important dynamic. So like, how do I deal with this? Is I am surrounded by people that I absolutely love, who are great coaches. And, I think the way I think about this is Michael Jordan had a coach. Like, there's no reason Jeetu Patel should not have a coach if Michael Jordan had a coach. I have not perfected everything. And so I think what you have to do is find these mentors, find these coaches, find these people who are going to be looking to do right by you, but are going to be intolerant of catering to your ego. And if you can do that, And if you can get enough people that can provide you that input on an ongoing basis, not only do you get better, but as a team, you get better. And so I think this kind of notion that we have of hierarchy is actually a very flawed one, because I learn a lot. There's reverse leadership that's happening in my team all the time, where they're coaching me, they're guiding me, they're teaching me, they're telling me what to do, they're telling me what not to do. And I feel like that's a super important dynamic that you have to construct. That does not happen accidentally. That is intentionally constructed.
You have to
make sure that you have to be very intentional to actually build that up. Because if you don't, one of my mentors had told me one time, Jeetu, at some point in time, you will experience extreme failure at work. And you better build a system around you of people that can get you through that process of extreme failure at work. Because if you don't, you will break at that point. And, whether that's family, whether that's friends, whether that's mentors, in my case, it's a combination of all of them, but you need to make sure that you have to have that. My 14-year-old daughter has now moved into a stage, 15-year-old daughter now, has moved into a stage where not only do I coach her and I mentor her, but she coaches and mentors me, because she knows things that she's doing well and I can learn a lot from her. And that happened at a much younger age than I thought it would. And I feel like you have to just keep seeking those people out.
And what we know from, about your daughter, that she's great in asking questions. So clearly she could be, or she will be, a fantastic coach. So,
I hope so.
Jeetu, thank you so much for being, on the show. It's fantastic sharing, and I appreciate it fully, your vulnerability, your openness, your really, deep thinking in terms of, what you wanted to share. So to me, so many insights and learning from your experience, your story. So thank you so much. And for those people that are in the audience today, please follow Jeetu's journey on LinkedIn, and because I think it's something so interesting, and people, I'm sure they will appreciate, the kind of a leader you are. So Jeetu, thank you so much for being with us today.
Andre, it's such a pleasure to have be here with you. And, a lot of good interviews happen only because the people are asking the right questions. So you have a lot to do with it. Thank you for it.
Thank you so much.